August 2nd, 216 BCE. What if the most horrifying battlefield victory in history became the very reason its mastermind would ultimately lose everything? On that blistering summer morning at the Battle of Cannae, the ground trembled beneath the marching weight of nearly 80,000 soldiers of the Roman Republic. Confident, loud, and doomed in ways they could not yet imagine. Because waiting in eerie silence across the dust-choked plain stood the smaller but deadly precise army of Hannibal Barca, a commander whose mind moved like a trap snapping shut. And as the sun climbed, so did the tension, until the clash began not as chaos, but as a carefully orchestrated nightmare, where Hannibal deliberately weakened his own center, letting it bend backward like a collapsing spine, while his strongest African infantry curved inward from both flanks, slowly sealing the Romans into a living coffin. And what followed was not just defeat, but suffocation. Men crushed so tightly they could not lift their arms. Soldiers screaming as blades pierced them from inches away. Bodies piling in layers so thick that some suffocated standing up. Unable to fall, unable to fight, and ancient accounts whisper of a horror few dare imagine, where blood soaked the soil so deeply that the earth itself seemed to breathe it back in, turning the battlefield into a choking metallic swamp. And by nightfall, nearly 50,000 Romans lay dead, a scale of slaughter so immense it haunted survivors for generations. Yet here's where the story flips in a way no one expects, because instead of breaking Rome, this catastrophe ignited something darker and far more terrifying than defeat: resilience forged in desperation. And back in Rome, panic did ripple through the streets. Whispers of annihilation, families awaiting sons who would never return. But the Senate did not surrender, did not negotiate, did not even consider peace. Instead, they did something almost unthinkable. They banned mourning in public, forcing strength over sorrow, rebuilding legions immediately, even arming slaves and criminals. Because survival mattered more than pride, and while Hannibal stood victorious in southern Italy, his army surrounded by the ghosts of his own success, he made a critical decision that historians still debate. He did not march on Rome itself, whether due to lack of siege equipment, exhausted troops, or overconfidence in Rome's collapse. And that pause became the crack where Rome's comeback began, because from that moment forward, Rome changed its entire strategy, avoiding direct confrontation, embracing delay, harassment, and attrition under leaders like Fabius Maximus, turning the war into a slow grind that even Hannibal's brilliance could not instantly solve. And deep within the ranks of Rome's recovering armies were soldiers who carried the trauma of Cannae like a scar that never healed. Men who had heard the suffocating screams, who had seen friends disappear beneath crushing waves of bodies, and those memories didn't weaken them. They hardened them, creating a new kind of Roman soldier, one who understood fear but moved through it anyway. And in later engagements, these veterans fought with a quiet, almost haunted determination, as if each clash was not just war, but revenge against the nightmare they had survived. And one chilling account describes a Roman survivor recalling how, during the encirclement, he could hear the breathing of the man beside him, growing weaker until it simply stopped. Yet there was no space to fall. His corpse remained upright, pressed into him, warm, then cold, then part of the wall of death around him. And that kind of horror does not fade. It transforms, it fuels. It reshapes an entire civilization's mindset. And while Hannibal continued to win battles afterward, none would ever match Cannae, and strangely, that became his problem. Because Rome no longer played his game, they refused decisive engagement, stretched his supply lines, isolated his allies. And slowly, year after year, the tide shifted, until the war moved to Africa itself, culminating in his eventual defeat at Zama in 202 BCE, where the same Romans he once trapped now adapted, countered, and overcame, proving that resilience, not brilliance, can define the outcome of a war. And here's the twist that hits hardest. The most perfect tactical victory in history became strategically hollow because it failed to destroy the will of Rome. And instead, it revealed something far more dangerous. A society that could absorb unimaginable horror and come back stronger, meaner, and more relentless than before. So when you think about Cannae, don't just see it as Hannibal's masterpiece. See it as the moment Rome learned how to survive hell itself. And maybe that's the real question worth arguing about. Did Hannibal win the battle? Or did Rome win the war the very moment they refused to break, even when surrounded by death itself?